Hello, this is Randy Ewart, aka the Connecticut Sped Math Dude. I'm here to talk to you about math, not just the math that your student is working on right now, but the math that is involved in your student's progress towards life goal, his or her chosen life goal, and the math that would be needed for that life goal. Let me give you a little bit of my background as that really relates to what I'm going to be presenting to you today. I'm a long-time secondary math teacher. I taught middle school and high school math. I've also taught math at various colleges and universities. And then at one point, I went on to get a master's in special ed and turned my focus to working with students with special needs on math. To the point now where I also teach special education math at a couple of different colleges and universities. I've also worked with students at different ages from preschool all the way up through college and beyond. At one point I had a student who is 23 and I was helping him learn to count money. So I've seen how the math plays out through the life of the student as a student, and what happens when the student moves on past special ed, and how prepared or unprepared the student is, and the family as well. So I want to talk to you about all of that. And I use this document to help organize and to unpack everything that's involved with math now and in the future, all the way to the life goals, as I mentioned earlier. So let me explain to you how this document works. First of all, it's designed for backwards planning. So you start with the life goals, which I'll explain in a moment, and then you work backwards all the way to the current IEP. Now, I want to mention one key element of this, and that is this line right here. That's graduation. So that's a bright red line. So we want to be very mindful of what happens in K-12 education to prepare the student for that jump into life, post-secondary life, regardless of life goals. We want students to be prepared so that when the special ed services are removed, that student can be as independent as possible. So that's a big piece to all of this. And again, as a college instructor and someone who's worked with students after they've exited special ed, I've seen the challenges that families and students face. And so the idea is, let's try to start addressing that as soon as possible to give the parents and the student as much opportunity to be prepared. As you navigate through this document, take note of the different links that I have here. These are actual links that you can click on, and it'll take you to different sources of information. This can be blog posts, these can be web pages, videos, documents, handouts. And so this is the home base for all that different information that I've provided for you. So now let's get to the actual life goals. I have come up with 3 different categories of life goals for students. And there's different ways of looking at this, but this is the way that makes sense to me. So the first one that's kind of the most talked about is in K-12 education is going to college and then perhaps going on to get a career or have a profession. Now, you can get a career or have a career or a profession with just a 2-year as opposed to a full 4-year. So there's some overlap, but for the sake of my discussion, I'm going to try to simplify it. So the idea here is what needs to happen in high school to prepare the students for a four-year school and then for their jump to a career. Well, one of the things to look at is what's the math that is needed. In this example that I have here in this rectangle, this is the curriculum requirements for the credit requirements for someone majoring in social work. And a student in that major would need to take statistics. Well, if that's the case, then perhaps the student focuses on here in the courses and services section. Maybe the idea is that we focus the coursework on statistics or even taking a statistics class so that when they get there, they already have a foundation for statistics. There's another piece that I'd like you all to be aware of, two other big pieces to that. There's a possibility that the student will, before he can take this statistics class, he or she can take this statistics class, the student may need to take a remedial class if they don't do well on a placement test. Well, the first placement test is actually the SAT. The colleges, many colleges will place a student into the math course, a specific math course based on their score on the math sections of the SAT. If the SAT is high enough, then the student can then take perhaps whatever math class that they need. If it's low, they may be then directed towards a remedial class. Now, before that happens, the student would be given, and you'll see this here in the box. The student would be given a placement test, and then the placement test would then determine, does the student take a college level class or a remedial class? Now, understand this, they have remedial classes in college, and these remedial classes are like Algebra 1/Algebra 2 level. The student pays the money for the course, but gets no credit. What it does is it allows the student then to move on to an actual college level course. So certainly we want to avoid that and then start focusing on what math class that they need. Another element to this, though, is not just the academic, the course, the curriculum, but there's also the study skills component. So the idea is start thinking about how well prepared your student is or is learning to be for when they get to college. How effective of an independent learner are they? Can they organize a notebook and organize their notes and then use the notebook and use the notes to be an effective student? Can they be independent? So these are all issues that could be addressed sooner rather than later so that they don't show up on campus in my class and they're not prepared to be independent. So these are things that you could start thinking about. The next category would be the vocation. Now there's two situations here, possible situations here that I want to talk about. The first one would be, is there some specific math a student would need for that particular vocation, or that is a goal for the family and for that student? For example, auto repair. Well, auto repair involves a lot of measurement. If that's the case, then any type of training, education, post-secondary education or training, and the actual job would involve measurement. Well, back in high school, well, there could be, through the IEP, a lot of focus on measurement so that when the student gets there, they're much better prepared to handle the coursework and the training that involves measurement. Now, the other situation could be there isn't a lot of math, or there really isn't math specific to the job, the future job that the student wants to have, but the student needs to take one math class in a community college, for example. Well, that one math class would probably be an algebra class. So the idea is all of the math and the training that the student's getting, the training in terms of math, can be focused on passing that one algebra class. So you could do a lot of algebra work here and then use that to prepare them for that algebra class that they need to take so they can check that box and move on to their job. Now, how do you know what math would be needed? Well, I have in here the math skills that might be needed. There's two sources. One would be go to the actual college, and I have an example here. I have a link to a Lincoln Tech web page, and go to the college and look at the desired major or vocation or job, and then see what's the math that they would be teaching in the college or that vocational school or in that training, and then focus on the math in high school to then prepare them for that math that they would be seeing in college. Another source would be something like Career One Stop that I have linked here, where you can search out different jobs, and then they provide information including the type of math and skills that they would need. And then that would inform the coursework and services your student gets while in high school and middle school. It's never too early to start. Some of our kids need multiple years, so start as soon as you can is what I recommend. And then the third category is the one that my son belongs or falls under, and that's trying to help our students just be as independent as possible, and that they would get some sort of maybe day program or supported work or something along those lines, or just maybe they just have just a regular old job that doesn't really require specialized training, and you just want them to learn how to be independent. Well, how do we know what math is involved with that? Well, then we're probably talking about consumer math, and one of the things you could look at is some of the testing that they do, and all the schools do this, but you could really start to unpack it and start making this connection from high school and in the K-12 transition or the district transition program to life after special ed. Start looking at what's the math that's involved in consumer math. Now I have a couple links here for you to help you unpack that. But let me talk about that for a moment. So this is a little excerpt from a handout that I used when I was working with kids in a life skills program at a high school. We took kids to the grocery store and collected some data on how they navigated the store and how they managed the money and the math part of this. You would be surprised how much math is involved that's kind of hidden, plus how many non-math issues arise when the student's trying to navigate a grocery store. Now the math part, the obvious one is counting money. Well, there's another layer to the counting money. When the students in a high school classroom, they're sitting at a desk usually, and they have all this space, and they have the money laying nice in a nice pile right on the desk, and it's much easier then to manage, do the mechanics of counting the money, and there's not so much pressure. This is very different when you're standing in line, and all you have is that the little counter that's used for you on which you use to write checks, and you're pulling money out of a wallet instead of having it nicely piled on the table, and you have people standing around you. And so it's a very different environment. There's also math involved in the unit rate, the unit price of items, and in this bulky amount of food has a higher price, but it's cheaper overall based on the unit cost, the unit price. But do they need that much, and do they understand that this price is better even though it's a higher amount? There's expiration dates. There's how big of a size, whether you want a 12 ounce or a 16 ounce bottle of juice or whatever it is. And then the non-math stuff, as an aside, would include issues such as how do you navigate the store? How do you find the food items? Once you get to the proper aisle, how do you look through the aisle to find the food items? Do do you know not to park your cart in the middle of the aisle and block people? Do you know to get a cart? Do you know where to find a cart? Uh, do you know which register to go to? I had students that would go to any old register and there's no one there and the light's not on. So they even have to know, look for the light, and then that's the aisle that you go into. And then there's the social piece as well. So there's a lot to unpack. So the idea then is you could have the courses and services that are designed to help address all of that for when they're on their own. Prepare them as much as possible now. Especially kids like my son, they're going to need a lot more years than just what the transition program gives them. To give them the best opportunity to be successful. Here's a photo, an example is shown here in this photo. For the life skills program where I was a teacher, we created a mock grocery store and actually had kids take baskets in there, and they had a shopping list, and they'd have to get the items and then go up to the register and pay, and we had a cash register there, and then they would have to count out the money. And that could be done in high school and middle school even, to prepare them so that, again, they give them the best opportunity to be successful. Well, that takes us now to the current IEP. And there are a couple different items to talk about. There's the math objectives, and I have a blog post on that. There are the services, which we talked about, such as a mock grocery store, organizing a notebook, etc. There's the data, and I have some information about that. And then there's also the instruction. Now, what you can do is you can evaluate all these subcategories for the current IEP, but start evaluating them in terms of how are these moving your student through all these stages to help them be as prepared as possible. So start viewing these objectives and services and data instruction, not just for the year. When you're sitting in a PPT meeting, start thinking in terms of long term and where you're going, and that's actually the purpose. The purpose of special education is to provide students the skills for future employment, for independent living, and future education. And those are actually the 3 items that are on the transition page in the IEP. But the idea here, the premise of this whole video and this whole document, is to not wait for that transition, but to push the long range viewing of what's happening as further down the grade levels as possible. There's one last thing to talk about that parents often ask me about is, well, how do I know which category that I'm going to choose? I can't make that decision now. Well, there's 2 things I want to mention about that. One, it's useful to start thinking in these terms now so that you can start processing and making sense of this process, this long-range view. The longer you have to think about it, the more you'll understand it. And then as you think about it, as things come up, as you're working with your student and you're working with the team and the education, you can start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, as opposed to trying to put all the pieces together once you get to age 16. Now that's a tall task right there. So try to get as much of that out of the way as soon as possible, and as before you get to age 16, so that when you get there, you're much better prepared. Plus, there's a lot of work that needs to be done for a lot of our students, and it takes more than the time that's allotted when you start at age 16. I mean, you start at age 16 and the student exits when they're age 18, you're talking about 2 years. Some of our kids need a lot more time than that. So start looking ahead. The other thing is, well, then how do you make the actual decision? Usually I think you can narrow it down to 2 of these 3 categories. So I had one recent parent that I talked to, and this was a possible goal, but this was the more likely goal. And so what you can do is you can start shooting for the higher level, and then in terms of education, the higher level of education, 4-year college versus 2-year. And then it's easier to ramp down than it is to try to ramp up. It's much harder to be a junior in high school and say, oh, we got to get these extra credits for college, for a 4-year college. Whereas if you're here and you say, well, you know, we're not going to go to a 4-year school, we're looking at a community college. Well, then it's easier then to meet the criteria for a community college if you've been up here and then you're dropping your expectations. Now, I don't mean by dropping expectations as in it's a lesser approach. Again, my son I'd be happy if he could bag groceries. That would be my life would be complete at that point if we could get up to that stage, that position in life. So I don't mean to imply that one's better than the other. So you may have 2 categories that you're looking at, and then how can you start to figure out which one? Well, let me go to, I'm going to share another screen with you. So let me, by way of example, let me explain how do you know when to make that decision. So let's say these are our 2 categories. So let's say this is the 4-year. This is the, let me try that again. This is the 4-year. This is the 2-year college, and this is just this is independent living that we're talking about. So let's say the one parent, they're hoping to do a 4-year, and then the backup plan for them would be a 2-year. Well, let's say now they're in 8th grade. So the student's now in 8th grade, and let's say they are working at a 3rd grade math level according to the school. Well, by the time they get to high school, by the time they get to their senior year, if we want them to be I'm sorry, this is go to a 4-year. So let's say they're down here instead. So in order for them to get to the senior level of math, to get them ready for college, they need this is during 8th grade year, so we're talking 1, 2, 3, in 4.5 years, they need to get from 3rd grade to 12th grade, which is 9 years. So that means they would need to complete 2 years worth of math every year so that they are here. They are ready as seniors to go do college, 4-year college level math. At that point, you might be thinking, okay, this is not going to happen. If they're in 8th grade, they've only been able to get to 3rd grade, that's not enough rate of change, or that's not fast enough for them to get caught up. Or you may think, the school really needs to step up. Then you can start asking, what's the plan? What do you have as a plan to catch my student up? So you can have one or the other. You can make a decision, it's not going to work, or then you can say, hey, what's the plan to get my student there to where he or she needs to be? And then that can help inform your decision as far as which category are you really going to fix your focus on. So that is my suggestions, my ideas for you as far as how to navigate the world of math for your student to help them get ready for their life goals. So this is not easy, and so I hope this document will help you, and this video will help you some. And you can always contact me through the blog. You can send me an email, and you can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. So I wish you well in your efforts to help your student, and I wish you all the best.